Kevin, and you know all this, but I'm going to go through the motions anyway. Kevin Gaffney is Chief Financial Regulator for the state of Vermont. As Commissioner at DFR, he has overview not only of credit unions and banks, but securities, insurance, and captive insurance companies. Appointed to his current role by Governor Scott in July of this year, and as I mentioned a few months before that as interim, he previously was Deputy Commissioner of Insurance since 2019, so a couple years in that role, and then was with the department for a total of 15 years before that, but has another career, 23 years of which was in insurance leading up to his start of public service work with the state of Vermont. So thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we have a mix of credit union leaders on board with us today from a mix of sizes and some state, some federal charter. So a good representation of Vermont's cooperative credit union family here. And again, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate this opportunity to get to know you and you to get to know Vermont credit unions.
Well, thank you, Joe. And thanks to everyone. I see some familiar faces out there that I did see up at Jay in May when I was interim, and so now it is official. So I'm really excited about this opportunity more broadly, but more specifically, the days like today are important to me. They're important in my view of what effective regulation is all about. It's not just what we think about or decide within the walls of DFR, but it's how we engage with the marketplace and the financial services industry more broadly. So I have at least one person joining me. So before I go any further, I'll just mention Aaron Ferentz, who is the acting deputy commissioner. For those of you that don't know officially, Molly Dillon is retired from DFR, and certainly we thank Molly for her great leadership. And part of that leadership was to making sure we had a good transition plan in the banking division. And so Aaron has a lot of experience, and I can let him talk maybe a little later about him when we kind of have more of a dialogue. Hopefully it's a dialogue. I'll share some general thoughts with you from my vantage point, but open to having that dialogue with all of you. So I'm thankful to have Aaron leading the banking division. I think joining us a little bit later, she had another commitment that overlapped, will be Emily Kosicki, and she's our director of policy. So certainly someone who leads and runs point for the department on the legislative front and is active at the legislature, which is soon upon us. So organizationally, we have actually 4 deputies that'll be in their first year. So both, obviously because of my change, a new insurance deputy, a new banking deputy, a new securities deputy, and a new captive deputy because Dave Provost retired at the end of August. So fortunately, they're all coming from the ranks, and we have a lot of good experience leading each of the divisions. So I feel very privileged to work with those folks. On the banking front, I think one thing I want to just talk about is more kind of at a macro level, some of the issues that I think transcend not just banking and financial services, but just the marketplace more broadly. And that's just the workforce and trying to retain and attract new employees. And I think when you talk about the workforce, sometimes it goes hand in hand with housing and affordable housing. So certainly not an area that we specifically work on, but indirectly we do. I think having a robust financial services industry, specifically having local credit unions available to consumers at a time when we have inflationary pressures and housing shortages, that they have professionals to help them to kind of make the best decisions for themselves as to what they can afford and how they can facilitate financing that. And so we really appreciate the work your members do in that space, but we also want to do anything we can do to help support that. So I would say any engagement like this, or any efforts in terms of education for consumers, we're happy to partner with AVCU. And I expect we will. I expect we will continue. I'm looking to haven't made a final decision, but I'm working towards kind of staffing some roles that will help us do that more, to engage more on a regular basis with industry. On the inflation front, I think it's important that that consumers do have the ability to have choice. You know, obviously, the financial demands right now for consumers are probably causing them to maybe have less in their savings account, but more need for different ways to access money. So I think the demand on the credit unions is going to increase in these times, and so your expertise and guidance is critical. The other area that we certainly, it doesn't necessarily fall directly in your space, but it is an area that we've certainly issued investor alerts, and it has certainly a banking component, which is cryptocurrency, and certainly what's happening in the cryptocurrency space. And I think there might have even been a presentation I was at back in May on that, and I would just say that, you know, a lot has happened even since that time frame in this space, and the marketplace brings a lot of potential risk and volatility, like other investment markets do, but there are other components of this marketplace that I think need better oversight and regulation. I know that's something that is kind of a combination of the feds and state regulators. One area that I think we will lean into is to look to pass the money transmitter model, which I know may not directly affect you folks, but it's good for you folks to know that we're looking to stand up a model that provides some level of oversight and regulation in this space, and intend to introduce that with our legislative agenda this session. The other area I think that, you know, we've seen a little bit of both happening in the marketplace is, you know, it's natural in a variety of financial services. My background, as Joe said, is insurance, so I've experienced it personally. You know, there's consolidation, and then there's a new entrance to the marketplace. And what brought me to Vermont was kind of an expansion to get closer to the marketplace. And what kept me in Vermont and now have me as a public servant and working at DFR is, you know, when the company kind of consolidated and closed up some operations here in Vermont. And we've seen that in our Vermont marketplace. We've seen certainly consolidation in our credit unions. I think what that does is it provides an opportunity for those transactions to provide greater choice for Vermonters over time. I think the scale can provide that kind of leverage that maybe each entity individually wasn't able to offer what they can combined. So I think we see that see it as an opportunity. But we also have seen, you know, a new entrant, albeit a bank, not a credit union, but, you know, that also offers maybe a more targeted choice for consumers, especially small business owners, to access financial services with a new kind of local flavor and a local focus. So, you know, what it shows me is that we have a market here that is ripe for all those types of transactions and activities, and I want to do all we can at DFR to keep that marketplace more vibrant. A vibrant marketplace gives consumers greater choice. It creates competition, and so I welcome all of that. One of the areas that, I mentioned outreach, and one of the, areas of consumer protection, our obviously our primary roles are to foster vibrant markets, but also protect consumers. And I think an area of consumer protection that I want to do more and focus more on is education, and whether that's education with more targeted financial literacy. We've done a lot to work with kind of two segments of the marketplace for young adults that are kind of maybe entering either the work world or college life or trade school, and giving them kind of some foundational knowledge so they can manage themselves and manage their finances at a certain basic level. And then we've also focused on more the elderly population, who sometimes are subject to frauds and scams, and how to protect themselves. And again, one way to protect is to provide people knowledge. And if they have the knowledge and awareness, even if they don't have all the answers, they can at least go to either their professionals in their credit unions, or they can go to the regulator if they have questions, and we can help guide them. So I'm open to more opportunities to partner with you folks on ways to add that level of consumer protection through education. I guess the other area of focus for me is just learning more about this space. I come from an insurance background, so I have a lot to learn in this area. I'm going to rely heavily on Aaron for a lot of the day-to-day operational things, but my approach to things is very accessible. So if you folks want to, get to spend more time with me one-on-one, my goal is to try to do more of that over time, get to understand what's going on in your operations. I remember in May, I was particularly impressed with a group of young professionals that you had, kind of these rising stars in your organization. And that was really encouraging. I was fortunate enough to sit at a table at dinner with a few of them, and I was honestly tempted to talk about the benefits of financial regulation, but I didn't do that because they are very sharp individuals, and I was very impressed. I think you folks should feel good, if you don't already feel good, about how you've developed them and how you've gotten them to the place in their career where they are. I think when you're in those first 5 to 10 years of your career, there's a lot of decisions that you can make that put you on either maybe a good path or a less focused path. So it just seems like I saw folks that were fairly focused on what they're doing and kind of get the role they play in the community. So I'm going to leave it there and give you folks an opportunity to ask questions if you'd like. Oh, Joe, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I do that too often. We did not have any planned agenda for Kevin and I for this discussion. We did intend for it, as Kevin pointed out, to be kind of an exchange, a discussion. So yeah, we want to encourage everyone to just make comments, ask questions, whatever's crossing your mind. And I guess I'll start, Kevin. Those young professionals that you referenced, we do have a pretty active young professional group, and it kind of subdued a little bit during COVID, but they're kind of ramping up again. And I think most credit unions on the line with us today have some involvement of one sort or another with that group, with one or more people involved. And they meet fairly regularly, and they do development within their own credit union. And then as a group, learning about what goes on in each other's credit unions and, how they can further their education. And as a trade association, we work with that group multiple times through the year. They're very active in our annual meeting. We have, when we're able to, and we'll try to do it again this year, when we have our State House Day, we usually do orientation kind of session, I guess I'd call it, for those folks or those that can participate anyway, about what the advocacy process is all about and how that works, a day in the life of a lawmaker, a day in the life of a lobbyist, and so on and so forth. So they are pretty active, and they are tomorrow's leaders. So we're proud of that.
Well, just maybe I'd just add, Joe, certainly just to let you know at a macro level that we recognize the work ahead for us to be effective regulators. We have to be right-sized. And so staffing wise, we're working hard on that front. So we're not, we have some opportunities to fill out our staff. We really feel pretty confident that we can do that in the near term, because I do want to make sure that we have the right size in terms of staffing. I've seen it in other jurisdictions where you get a little bit understaffed. First of all, it's not generally good for morale, but more importantly, it just doesn't allow us to be a little more proactive in that on the education front. And I know, a former commissioner who now will be treasurer-elect, and I have been chatting as he had a successful campaign about even partnering with the treasurer's office. I mean, it's certainly an area that of financial literacy that he will, I think, will be one of his focuses. So we'll look to partner with other agencies like the treasurer's office to affect some of those items. And I don't know, Aaron, I don't want to put you on the spot, but did you want to just speak briefly and introduce yourself while we have folks here? Maybe I'm being redundant and everyone knows Aaron, but I just thought since Aaron is going to be the acting deputy, and my intention is to make that, if he's willing, a more permanent opportunity down the road.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think I've met everyone, or for the most part, most of y'all. So it's nice to meet you. So I've been with DFR for 20 years, actually last week. I was in the field examining a lot of your institutions, and then I became the director about 7 years ago. So I do think that I have a lot of institutional knowledge, which will help me in the role as the deputy. So I look forward to getting to know you all in a new and different way, but hopefully in still a collegial way, like always.
And one of the areas that's emerging in Vermont, obviously since October 1st, is the cannabis marketplace, and certainly some of that has banking components, credit union components, and parts of it have insurance components. So I know Aaron and I know the insurance deputy have been working and communicating with the Cannabis Control Board and just making sure we're leaning in to assist on any of those issues. So I know that's something that we've been actively involved in and will continue to stay involved in.
Commissioner, it's Rob Miller. Along those lines, any early observations on Vermont's expansion as it relates to the banking industry that you can offer based on what you've observed so far? Or Aaron?
Yeah. I mean, I'll jump in, Kevin, not to put you on the spot, but I think it's interesting. The thing that's striking me most is that the Cannabis Control Board can't say no to a licensee. They just act upon the licensees as they're received. So the retail waiting list in Burlington is a bit concerning to me. I think, if we get oversaturated, there'll be pressures on those licensees, possibly to cut corners or to take risks that financial institutions really don't want to be a part of. So that would be an area where I would recommend institutions to continue to look at. I think the other statistics that I heard is just the inverse relationship between indoor and outdoor growing facilities and what they are receiving and what they've expected to see. So just not really sure how the market will work out in this first full year. But yeah, I wish Congress would get off their hands and sort of act in this space, because that would really, I think, clear up most of the immediate challenges, though their solutions are always short-sighted at best. But at least something to address a lot of your concerns with banking these industries, and a lot more of your colleagues' concerns with banking this industry would be helpful.
Well, Aaron, you've probably heard me ask these questions over the last several years. So you obviously just where I was going next, which was any indication or any involvement on the state's part in the federal front in terms of advocating for whether it's the Safe Banking Act or any knowledge that perhaps you can share based on those conversations with your colleagues in other states?
Yeah, our DFR has not done any direct advocating, though we are part of two national organizations, CSBS and NASCUS, both on the credit union banking sides. And both of those organizations are actively, engaged in that sort of same logic of, we need a solution. You clearly need more financial institutions involved, and there are risks that I think are unfair. So all of DFR's focus has really been in that space. Mostly because our congressional delegation would support any smart efforts right now. So there's not much lobbying we could do to fix that problem.
Thank you.
So Aaron or Kevin, either one of you, along those same lines, just to follow up, and maybe I missed it from reading between the lines in Aaron's comments, but the media in Vermont, not right now, but going back a little ways, would have us believe that the floodgates, so to speak, kind of opened as far as license applications and so on and so forth. And there's all these prospective retail businesses, wanting to set up shop, or they did, and getting their permit to do so and whatnot. But I recall that the Cannabis Control Board, one of their requirements for licensing was, in one meeting I was in, was having a financial services relationship of one sort or another. And I know that we've got, some credit unions that have jumped into the mix in the past year or two, and not sure about banks in the state. I heard some discussion about one, maybe two, but didn't hear any more after that. So have either of you heard, or all of these retail businesses, is it sounding bigger than it really is? Have all the licensees gotten a relationship with a Vermont institution, or are they finding other alternatives out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the specific breakdown, but I do know that there are other types of relationships that are being opened through out-of-state financial institutions. So there are a few, I'll call them a fintech service providers that have a banking as a service relationship with other banks that are located, wherever around the country. And so sure, they do all of the actual operational activities, but the funds are held at that depository institution somewhere else. So I think that is a bigger provider than we initially thought would be, but it is helping to solve some of the issues.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, other comments or questions? Anyone?
Hi, Kevin and Aaron. This is John Dwyer. Just a note, perhaps preparing for the legislative session. I think some of the press, and Joe does a great job of making us aware of these things, but some of the press is acknowledging that one of the hot topics in this legislative session will be housing, and more around, as has been for many years, the topic of development of, financing of, delivery of housing to people here in need in Vermont. The reason I bring it up is simply to point out that many of us are heavily involved in housing and mortgage activities. So as you hear of consideration of different models, different challenges, we certainly stay in touch with entities like VHFA, for us, CHT, other parts of the state have other housing agencies, but the credit union industry is, and I think I can speak for many of my peers, we intend to stay part of the solution. So, there's always a risk in legislative processes that new models seem to need to be built rather than those that exist and those that have worked. So if you hear of anything, Joe and his team monitor the legislative process, but just a polite request that if there are things that you're involved in or hear of, we certainly want to make sure that the industry is part of that conversation.
Yeah, John, thank you. And no, exactly. And I think that's why I'm hopeful that we would just have a dialogue on topics like this. I think, there's no question housing is going to be one of the topics with many layers at the legislature this session, and probably just with a new legislature and new leadership. Certainly DFR, we're doing a lot just from our vantage point, because it's really important. We're looked at as subject matter experts, and we don't become that without engaging with industry and just understanding the marketplace and understanding what's going on. And to your point that not trying to invent something that maybe already exists, that there's already a way to serve a problem and meet a need. So I'd welcome that. I know we're doing a lot. We have a lot of legislative meetings coming up, some this week, some next week, just to introduce ourselves to the new leadership. So I'll keep that in mind. And I know Emily Kosicki may have joined by now, and certainly Emily will keep that in her focus. She also she's a designee and sits on my behalf on the VHFA board. So she's certainly quite involved in a lot of activities there, and a lot of that has overlap with your folks' efforts. So something that we can certainly continue to talk more about as things develop through the legislature. So I'm open to keeping that dialogue open, and the legislative session can take on a life of its own, but I think if we all have kind of some things on our radar that we're focused on. So I'm open to hearing about that and any other issues that may arise that you'd want to have some engagement with us on.
Okay.
Following up on your comment, Kevin, about the legislature and the DFR's involvement with it in the coming session and whatnot, it was a week, maybe 10 days ago or so, that we recorded a podcast with some of our advocacy team, and they were commenting about all the new faces that are going to be in the legislature this year, and in particular, a lot of new chairs of committees with different priorities, and some of them are more kind of along the lines of young professionals, more, I guess I'll call it up and coming lawmakers and whatnot, replacing some of the, I'll call it old guard sort of. And so it'll be a lot different year this year, and a return, now that we're past COVID, to some of these, I guess I'll call it older, long-standing perpetual issues like housing and climate change and so on and so forth. So it will be an interesting year, and I'm sure we will spend a lot of time educating legislators this year, as will you, on all the issues that you as a regulator face too.
Yeah, and again, I'll just give Emily credit because she's the one that kind of took the initiative. We always have some level of engagement where we're taking extra steps this year because we realize that there's a lot of folks in new roles. They may have some initial thoughts on how to address various issues, but I think it's always helpful for them to understand what our role is and what expertise we can bring to certain areas. And sometimes that expertise is directly from us, and sometimes that expertise is engaging with the industry. So I think that the communication this year is going to be, it's always critical, but I think this year it's important that we build a good foundation with these new legislators and legislative leaders, so that it serves us well throughout the session. It takes time. It takes time to build those relationships. The ones that we've established didn't happen overnight. They often happen through our actions, right? We're asked to, this session, it's not insurance, it's not banking or securities or captive insurance primarily. It's mostly health insurance studies that we're doing. But whatever it is we're working on, when we come to the legislature with a kind of a thoughtful analysis, with not necessarily an agenda to drive it in one direction or another, but to provide a full view of the issue, that's well respected at the legislature generally. So we want to take that approach, whatever the issues are. So certainly housing, we should be looking at, whatever the new ideas are in front of us, but also make sure that legislators are aware of the current solutions that exist today. And so again, I'll just repeat my offer there that the financial literacy piece, whatever you folks think, whatever role we can play. Sometimes our role can just be to echo out some of the education you already provide to your members. But if there's a way that we can help in educating consumers and making them more, by being more educated, I think they will access more services over time. I think sometimes the lack of knowledge doesn't give folks full access to all the financial services. And that's another area that we want to look at, is just the underserved populations, making sure that not only those that already engage with financial services are aware of and can manage in an educated way, but also that the access to services is more broadly available.
So shifting gears for a second, Kevin, you mentioned NASCUS, and I sit on a NASCUS committee or two and meet with those folks and with my counterparts from other states every couple weeks, probably. And one of the things that I'm wondering if you have any insights on is, you mentioned about, consolidation in insurance, where your career was, and we certainly have seen a lot of consolidation in credit union land and in banking. And with that has also come, a shift in the borders of credit unions and the regulatory borders. We are a dual charter system in credit union land and banking too. And so, we have had at one time, going way, way back, each state law and the credit unions operating underneath it were somewhat of little islands, sort of. And as things change over the years and whatnot, not only are they all competing with each other, but they're competing with financial providers, credit unions, in our case, in neighboring states or far-flung states or whatever, depending on their charter, whether they're state or federal. And so I'm wondering what impact that you think, and maybe you don't have the banking and credit union experience to substantiate this, maybe you do in your other regulated entities, what impact that you think that has had on DFR as a regulator, and its peers in New Hampshire, New York, Massachusetts, Maine, so on and so forth. Do you, whether it's insurance or captives or banking, have you seen those regulatory bodies having to, I guess I'll say, coordinate or work together more closely, or are they still pretty much stay in their own lane unto themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. And I would say, my experience, again, mostly in insurance, but I think it transcends all the financial services, is that we as regulators have had to be more agile, and we're not in as clearly defined lanes all the time. So I think even in areas where we don't necessarily regulate, if it's a federal charter, I think just being aware of the landscape is important, or being aware of the landscape in another jurisdiction. So I think as those lines are more blurred, where we need to think more with greater agility. I think that's just a structural complexity. I think there's so much complexity right now in financial services, whether it's products or it's corporate structures, or in insurance. I know we've seen a lot in private equity ownership areas. So I think there's a lot of different areas that we're probably going to have different skill sets over time as regulators than we traditionally had. I think so. I think there's a lot of things that are changing and will continue to change, and we have to stay abreast of those. So what it means, what those ultimately mean, those consolidations for consumers, I think there's a lot of potential benefits to consumers that scale provides. It provides the stability to the institution with that scale. But for regulators, it is more challenging sometimes because of those lines are more blurred.
Yeah, I'll just add, Joe, that from a day-to-day perspective, we do coordinate. You won't really see this, but we do coordinate with other states. So if there are institutions that we are examining that have cross-border activities, we'll reach out and say, would you like to participate? If so, here's when we're doing it. So we do share that information behind the scenes. So we are able to still oversee some of those other institutions.
Thank you. One of the things you'll see coming your way, and I haven't spoken with any of the people on the line about it, so I may perhaps somebody will send me a nastygram for saying this afterwards, but NASCUS has been working on, and maybe you gentlemen are aware of it already, has been working on for some time a rewrite of a interstate, I won't say compact, but a working agreement between regulatory agencies of different states. And there have been 3 or 4 of those between different combinations of states around the country, and they're trying to consolidate it down into one modernized, improved, and streamlined agreement that basically, for the benefit of the credit unions on the line, allows 2 states to say, well, basically, we'll let your credit union do business in our state if you let our credit union do business in your state, as long as they both abide by the laws of each state, and so on and so forth, kind of things. Basically mimicking what federal credit unions can do already. And so I don't know the particulars of it in terms of the exact verbiage or anything, but I would encourage you as our state regulator to scrutinize that very carefully and consider it when it comes across your desk, because it seems like sometimes, I haven't heard it too often, and I'm not speaking specific to Vermont, but sometimes I've heard the choice between a state charter and a federal charter is that ability to just go set up shop in some other state someplace, whether it's just across the border or halfway across the country. And much easier for a federal charter than a state charter, obviously.
Sure. No, I am aware of those previous versions, and pre-COVID, I think there was some discussion internally about moving forward. Now that,
right.
I have heard from Brian Knight at NASCUS that they are, sort of re-engaging those discussions. So
yes,
we obviously I have to let Gaffney know, but I think we'd be willing to engage that further.
Right. Who's this Gaffney guy you're talking about?
I like when he calls me Gaffney. I feel very, I hate the commissioner thing.
I haven't thought of a better nickname yet, so we'll just go with last names right now.
Well, you don't know my family, but that's kind of a long-standing nickname for a lot of, whether it was my dad or my son.
Wow.
They always went by Gaffney. But yeah, I can say that on the insurance front, there's certainly an interstate compact for certain products, and there's some yings and yangs to that, but it does provide some uniformity and some benefits to the regulated entities in that space. So, but I'd be open again. That's another topic that we'd certainly want to have your input and engagement as we tackle those issues.
Thank you so much. Hey, other questions, comments, concerns, anything?
It's Bob. It's Bob Lake.
Hey, Bob.
Are you there? Hey, so Commissioner Gaffney, question for you. What is it going to look like for our fees for what's remaining of the state chartered credit unions? Any idea?
I'm going to hand that one to Aaron.
Sure. Yeah, we're not anticipating any change in our funding structure due to any, legislative change, or even with the losing Vermont state employees soon. The department is also funded not only from those fees, but also licensing fees from mortgage lenders and mortgage brokers. So I don't think we've taken care to either hold the line in terms of the rate or even lower it over the last few years to sort of give you some benefit as being a state charter.
Great. Well, if you need my vote, I would strongly encourage you to charge an impact fee to, those larger credit unions in the state, John, Rob, New England Federal, Bob Morgan, those guys. I would strongly encourage you to charge them a fee, a large fee.
If I could, Bob, I would.
Okay. I don't see them volunteering. I see smiles, but no volunteering. So thank you.
I got to be careful. I'm a member over there too, so I've got different interests.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't want to cut off the conversation, but I don't want to drag it on either. Other comments or any input from anybody at all?
Well, I'll just ask you.
Jean.
Hi, Commissioner. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for meeting with us. It's Jean Guyard, Vermont Federal Credit Union. You talked a little bit about some new roles to engage in order to engage with the credit unions and banks with as you go forward. And I was wondering what that was going to look like. I certainly would be interested in hearing, issues that you find with maybe marijuana banking or any kinds of issues that are unique to the state of Vermont.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answer to all that yet, Gene. It's a concept. There's when you're a commissioner at DFR, there's two positions that are kind of at large that you can fill as you wish. One is trying to wrap up final decisions on an executive assistant, so that's certainly needed. And Tom Taylor, who's my former assistant in the insurance division, has been doing yeoman's work supporting myself and Deputy Commissioner Brown. But the other one is a position that Commissioner Pichek stood up because of the COVID pandemic, as someone who did a lot of work in the COVID modeling and a lot of great work in that space. But I'm looking to repurpose as somewhat of a for lack of a better term, a chief of staff that maybe has industry experience that can deal with not only maybe internal issues, but also policy issues, and someone that maybe can be a a more active liaison with the financial services industry. So if I can locate the right person with maybe a multifaceted background, and sometimes there are individuals that have banking and insurance backgrounds, because there's a lot of overlap in those areas. So that's kind of my general goal. I don't have a more specific details, but only to say that I just think we tackle so many issues right now, and I think if we had just a more regular conduit to the marketplace, it would just help us be more effective. It would also help us kind of be more, when we can. I mean, sometimes we have to tackle things and deal with them, and then once we can communicate them, we do. But for the most part, day in, day out, I think we can just enhance our transparency. And there's something on our mind that we're thinking about, that we convey that to you folks, so you kind of understand what the regulator's thinking, and then you're not surprised by some direction we're going, and that we've maybe been on this path for a while but haven't communicated. So I think all of those things is what value that role could serve, both internally at the department, but also externally to the financial services industry.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you to everyone who was able to join us this afternoon, and thank you, Aaron, too, for joining us. It's been great hearing from you, Commissioner, and Aaron, and we look forward to a long and healthy relationship between DFR and Vermont Credit Unions, be they state or federally chartered. So again, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to you at our Credit Union Day in the State House, our annual meeting, and any other gathering that we have where you can fit it into your calendar. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone. It's great seeing you guys and talking, and see you soon in person.